Module 53. And this is the social influence and groups. And the question we're going to answer in this module is, what are the major sources and tactics of social influence? What are the major sources and tactics of social influence? So the first thing we want to look at is social influencing groups. I want to give a basic definition for both of these. So first off, social influence. It's a process by which social groups and individuals exert pressure on an individual, either deliberately or unintentionally. So again, social influence is the process by which social groups and individuals exert pressure on an individual, and they do it either deliberately or they do it unintentionally. And then for groups, it consists of two or more people, right? Two or more people who interact with each other. Groups consist of two or more people who perceive themselves as part of a group. And the third is that they are interdependent, which means that events that affect one member affect others, and members' behavior has significant consequences for the group's success. So a group has to consist of two or more people who interact with each other. They perceive themselves as part of that group, and that they are interdependent, meaning that events that affect one member are going to affect other members. Now, groups themselves hold norms. Those norms are the informal beliefs, expectations, and standards about what is appropriate. They are the informal beliefs, expectations, and standards about what is considered appropriate. Okay, so now that we know what social influence is and what we know what a group is, the first part of this module that we want to discuss is discussing conformity. When you follow what others do. Conformity is following what others do. So definition-wise, conformity is a change in behavior or attitudes that are brought about by a desire to follow the beliefs or standards of other people. Conformity is a change in behavior or attitudes that are brought about by a desire to follow the beliefs or standards of other people. Now, one of the most classic experiments, historical experiments, looking at conformity was a study that was done by Solomon Asch. And this was done in the 1950s. What we find is that in about 1/3 of those trials, participants conformed to an erroneous group answer, meaning that even though that one individual, that participant, knew that the others in the group were giving the incorrect answer, they went along and they also gave the incorrect answer, just because they wanted to conform to what the others were doing. Some of the participants conformed nearly all of the time, and some participants never conformed. But in about 1/3 of the trials, they conformed to this erroneous wrong answer. So figure 1, this shows you a demonstration. This is how simple this Solomon Asch study was. So basically what happened, and I think I'll have a video posted online that goes along with this study that shows you the actual study that was done. But there was a standard line on the left, and then there were 3 comparison lines on the right. Line 1, line 2, and line 3. And what the investigator did, what the researcher did, is he wanted the participants to say which of the comparison lines was the same length as the standard line. Now, this is a really simple question, right? It is very clear that line 2 is the same length as the standard line. And there was one participant per trial. The other people in the room, they are called confederates. That is what they are called in psychology. Confederates are in on the experiment. They know what the experiment's about. They're part of the experiment. The participant, the volunteer, does not know that the confederates are in on the experiment. They think that they are also. That participant thinks that the others are also volunteer participants. So basically what happens is they start, and they always have the participant go last. So they will start going around the room, and very clearly they start saying 1, 1, 1. And the participant is looking at them like, what are they talking about? Obviously, 1 is not the same length as the standard line. This doesn't make any sense. However, they don't want to stand out and look different than them and go against everyone else. So on 1/3 of the trials, the participant went ahead and said line 1, like everyone else did, instead of clearly the correct answer, which was line 2. So some of the conclusions we have with conformity. The significant findings from this study focused on the characteristics of the group, the situation in which the individual is responding, the kind of task that they were asked to do, and the unanimity, that's kind of hard to say, the unanimity of the group. So significant findings focused on the characteristics of the group, the situation in which the individual is responding, the kind of task, and the unanimity of the group. Now, there are 2 other things that we look at. We look at status and we look at social support. So the status or the social standing of someone in the group is critical. If there is one person who has very high status compared to others in the group, they are more likely to get others to conform with them. Other thing is social support. This is where you have a group member who has a dissenting view from others in the group, and it makes nonconformity to the group easier. So in this Solomon-Asch study, on some trials, there was one individual who said line 2, which is the correct answer. But he went against with what everyone else said with line 1. If there was just one other person that gave the correct answer, the participant was more likely to give the correct answer and not conform to the incorrect answer. So social support is very important with conformity, as is status. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is groupthink. This is caving into conformity. So now what may happen is with groupthink, there has to be a decision that is made. And it is not always where majority rules. Sometimes it's where just a few people are very outspoken and very convincing that they convince others in the group to go along with them. So now there isn't just one person that's conforming. Usually there are a group of individuals conforming, but they follow what a few people in the group say. So let's think about this. First off, definition for groupthink. It's a type of thinking in which group members share such a strong motivation to achieve consensus that they lose the ability to critically evaluate alternative points of view. So, because some people are so convincing and so overbearing in what they want to go ahead and do, the group does not think things through critically. They make mistakes, right? They don't evaluate other points of view or other decisions that can be made, which is all part of critical thinking. They just go along with what these 2 or 3 or 4 other outspoken people are. That's the conformity aspect of it. Now, one tragic example in history of groupthink is the poor decision making of those NASA engineers whenever the Space Shuttle Challenger, Columbia, I think that should be Challenger, exploded. The destruction of the Space Shuttle Challenger. That should not say Columbia, that should say Challenger. So just to let you know, that's a typo on my part. I remember when the Space Shuttle Challenger launched. I was in 10th grade in high school. They wheeled in the television, right? We were all going to watch it because this is the first time that a teacher was put into space. And it was a very big deal. And what they found out afterwards is that some of the O-rings on the space shuttle were not working up to par. And there were some engineers who did bring this to the forefront, but they had already set back the Challenger twice before, and America was waiting for a teacher to be put into space. This was a big deal. And so there were a few people that were like, no, it's fine. We're not going to delay this again. We have to launch the space shuttle. The O-rings will be fine. It's not that big of a deal. And what happened is the group of engineers in that room went ahead and said it was okay to launch the space shuttle. And as you know what happened, the space shuttle launched. And within about 60 seconds or less, the Challenger exploded and everybody on board was killed. They should have thought it through more carefully. They should have done more critical thinking. They should have thought of alternative views. But because there were some people who were so hell-bent on getting that space shuttle into space that they were so convincing and convinced everyone else to go along with it. Now, in the very bottom of this slide, you see what is called entrapment. Entrapment is a circumstance in which commitments to a failing point of view or course of action are increased to justify investments in time and energy that have already been made. Entrapment is a circumstance in which commitments to a failing point of view or course of action are increased to justify investments in time and energy that have already been made. All right, the next one is conformity to social roles. Conformity to social roles. Conformity influences behavior. Conformity influences behavior through social roles. Social roles are the expectations for people who occupy a given social position. The way that conformity influences behavior is through social roles. And social roles are the expectations for people who occupy a given social position. Now, a very historical study done by Philip Zimbardo looking at this, social roles and how conformity occurs. I will also try to post a video of this study up on the course online also. But in this study, there were guards and there were prisoners. Now, everyone volunteered to take part in this study. This happened in Palo Alto, at a college campus, right? I think this was University of California, and it was at the Palo Alto campus. And what they did is they volunteered, they designated the volunteers in either to prisoners or into guards. And what they did is they made up the ground floor of the psychology department into a prison type of situation. And you had the prisoners who very much started to act like prisoners, and you had the guards who very much started to act like prison guards. And this study got so out of hand. The volunteers, who were just average people who volunteered to take part in this experiment, they took their social roles so seriously that it actually became detrimental to some of the prisoners' mental health. They weren't prisoners, right? They were volunteers who took part in an experiment, but they were taking their role so seriously that they actually, it became so dangerous to their mental health what happened. And so we found that conforming to social roles can have a powerful effect on behavior. It can induce people to change behavior in a very undesirable way. Okay, so let's continue on and let's now talk about compliance. Submitting to direct social pressures. Compliance itself is behavior that occurs in response to direct social pressure. And each of these situations that we're going to talk about next, I'm sure each of you have been in this type of situation, especially whenever it comes to buying a product or trying to be sold a product, or maybe you are the salesperson yourself and you are trying to get someone to buy a product. Okay, you're trying to get someone to comply, to go along with you. All right. So the first technique you could use is what is called the foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is where you start off by asking for something small, and then once you get them to comply, you then ask for more. So you start out with something small, and then you ask for a little bit more. You get the foot in the door, and once they comply to that, then you get them to come the whole way in. So you make a very small request first, and then you ask for a larger request. The second one is called the door in the face technique. This is kind of the opposite of foot in the door. Now, with the door in the face technique, basically what happens is you ask for a large amount first, right? The book gives the example is you ask for a $1,000 contribution to this campaign. And the person laughs in your face, like, I'm not giving $1,000. Are you crazy? And you're like, okay, well, how about giving $10? And you're like, well, $10 is much better than $1,000. So yeah, I'll give 10,000, or I'll give $10. So see how that goes? You ask for something big and astronomical that you know the person is not going to go for, so that the second thing you ask for doesn't seem like nearly as much, and you're more likely to get a contribution. So you have the foot in the door and you have the door in the face. Now, the third technique is called the that's not all technique. So what happens in this one is they offer you the price, right, which is way inflated. And you're thinking immediately like, I'm not paying for that. Like, let's say that you go to buy this used car and they're telling you that it's $50,000. And you're like thinking to yourself, $50,000, I'm not paying for that. But then the salesperson says, but in that $50,000, I'm going to give you this, and I'll give you a discount on this, and we'll offer you SiriusXM for 6 months, and we'll throw in, oil changes for life and tire rotations. So they ask for something that's very inflated, but then they're going to tack on these incentives. So, but that's not all. This is everything else that you get also. So that doesn't seem that bad anymore. And then the fourth way to use compliance is what's called a not so free sample. So anytime you get a free sample, you think that you're ahead, like, wow, I got these free samples. This is awesome. But when you take a free sample, it's almost as though that person who gave you this sample is now expecting something in return, right? And when you get something for giving something, that is what is called reciprocal, right? Reciprocity. So we have what is called the norm of reciprocity. It's the social standard that we should treat other people as they treat us. So I gave you this free sample. Now, how about if you come and buy a small bottle of perfume, right? Or I gave you this free sample to try this dip at the deli counter, and now I want you to buy it. So you see how that works? It's not so free because they're expecting something in return. Now, the branch of psychology, which is industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology, as it's more commonly referred to, is the branch of psychology focusing on work and job related issues. So it goes along with a lot of these things that we're talking about: worker motivation, satisfaction, safety, and productivity. And so, this compliance and promotions and promoting compliance and not so free and all of that stuff, that all goes along with this industrial organizational psychology. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about in this module is obedience.